Why do we stop when we see injustice? Some walk away. Some pretend they didn't notice. Mackenzie Reeves couldn't do either. The afternoon sun carved through the windows of Apex Combat Academy like a blade illuminating dust that hung in the air, thick with the smell of sweat and worn rubber mats. She stood in the doorway, her faded gray t-shirt blending into the crowd of students filing out after the 5 o'clock class. She hadn't planned to stop here. This gym was just a landmark from her past. A place she'd trained briefly in 2011 before shipping out to Bud S., before the Navy had stripped away everything soft about her and rebuilt her into something harder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. But she'd made a promise to Ryan Caldwell, and Mackenzie Reeves kept her promises, even to the dead, especially to the dead. The gym looked different now. The walls that once displayed faded posters of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu legends now showcased glossy photographs of the current owner, Derek Vaughn, posing with championship belts and trophies. Too many trophies. The atmosphere had shifted from what she remembered. What had been a welcoming dojo where students helped each other grow had become something colder, more competitive, more about dominance than discipline. She was turning to leave when she heard the voice. Sharp, cutting, mean. Move faster, old man, or find another job. I don't pay you to take your sweet time. The words came from the center of the mat where Derek Vaughn stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He was solid, maybe 38, with the kind of build that came from a lifetime of training. His black belt hung from his waist like a badge of authority. His eyes held that particular arrogance of someone who'd forgotten that belts measure skill, not character. At the edge of the mat, an elderly man knelt with a mop and bucket. He was perhaps 68, silver hair cropped military short, shoulders that still held an echo of the strength they'd carried decades ago. His hands trembled slightly as he wrung out the mop. There was something in the careful way he moved, the way someone moves when they're trying very hard to become invisible. Mackenzie's eyes caught the tattoo on his forearm as he reached for the bucket. The eagle, globe, and anchor, United States Marine Corps. The ink had faded to pale blue-green, the kind of aging that came from decades of sun exposure and hard living. But the symbol was unmistakable. A Marine, reduced to being screamed at by some gym owner with an ego problem. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vaughn," the old man said quietly. His voice carried the rough texture of someone who'd smoked for years and quit. Or maybe someone who'd breathed too much desert sand in places the government preferred not to discuss. "You told me to clean before the 6 o'clock class. I'm just trying to." "I told you to clean after everyone left." Derek cut him off. "Can't you follow simple instructions, or is that too complicated for you?" 3 students remained in the gym, pretending to adjust their gear while they watched the interaction with that guilty fascination of people who know they're witnessing something wrong but lack the courage to intervene. One of them, a young man who couldn't have been more than 19, caught Mackenzie's eye. He looked away quickly. Derek walked toward the old man, his bare feet slapping against the mat with deliberate weight, the kind meant to intimidate. When he reached the bucket, he didn't step around it. He kicked it. Hard. Dirty water erupted across the mat, splashing over the old man's worn sneakers and the cuffs of his maintenance uniform. The bucket clattered on its side, rolling in a slow semicircle before coming to rest against the wall. "Now look what you did," Derek said. "Clean it up, and this time try not to make a bigger mess." The old man didn't respond. He just knelt there, staring at the spreading pool of water with the kind of resignation that comes from having your dignity stripped away so many times you've stopped expecting people to return it. His jaw worked slightly, like he was grinding his teeth. But he didn't speak, didn't protest, didn't defend himself. That was when Mackenzie moved. She crossed the distance from the doorway to the mat in 10 measured steps. Her boots made almost no sound against the floor. The 3 remaining students noticed her first, their conversations dying mid-sentence as this stranger in civilian clothes walked onto the training space like she had every right to be there. Derek noticed a moment later, turning with the kind of irritated expression reserved for interruptions. "That's no way to treat a veteran," Mackenzie said. Her voice was calm, level. carrying none of the anger that burned cold in her chest, especially not a Marine. Derek's eyes swept over her, taking in the plain clothes, the lack of gym bag, the female features that immediately categorized her in his mind as someone who didn't belong in his world. "Who are you, his lawyer?" he asked. "This is a fight gym, princess, not a charity." The old man looked up at Mackenzie, and she saw it then. The shame. The kind that came from needing a job badly enough to endure this kind of treatment. The kind that came from watching someone younger, stronger, more successful treat you like you're worthless, and knowing that if you speak up, you'll be looking for work at 68 years old in an economy that had already decided you were obsolete. "I'm someone who recognizes disrespect when I see it," Mackenzie replied. Derek took a step closer to her. He was 6'1", perhaps 200 pounds of muscle and ego. He looked down at her 5'8" frame with the expression of a man utterly confident in his physical superiority. "Let me guess," he said. "You took a cardio kickboxing class once at the Y. Think you know martial arts. Think you're tough because you can punch a bag." One of the students snickered. The young one who'd looked away earlier didn't make a sound. Mackenzie held Derek's gaze without blinking. In her peripheral vision, she could see the old man still kneeling by the spilled water, his hands frozen on the mop handle as he watched this exchange with growing concern. "I know enough to recognize a bully when I see one," she said. The word landed like a physical blow. Derek's face flushed. A vein became visible at his temple. He was used to being called many things: champion, instructor, tough, uncompromising, but not that, never that. "Big words," he said, his voice dropping into a register that was supposed to sound dangerous. "You want to back them up, or are you just going to run your mouth?" Mackenzie glanced at the old man again. Their eyes met for just a second, and in that second she saw what she'd seen in 100 other veterans: the weariness, the weight of service that the civilian world couldn't understand and didn't appreciate, the quiet dignity that couldn't be stripped away no matter how much someone tried. She looked back at Derek. "I'll step on your mat," she said, "if that's what it takes to make a point." The gym went completely silent. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to fade into the background. Derek's expression shifted from anger to something like anticipation. This was familiar territory for him. This was where he proved himself over and over against anyone foolish enough to challenge his authority in his own gym. "Unless you're scared," he added, the mockery thick in his voice. "I'm not scared," Mackenzie said. The young student who'd been silent finally spoke up. "Ma'am, don't." His voice was quiet, urgent. "He hospitalizes people for fun, just let it go." Mackenzie turned to look at him. He was lean, with the kind of posture that suggested military background. Despite his youth, there was concern in his eyes. Genuine worry for a stranger who'd been foolish enough to speak up. "What's your name?" she asked. "Declan, ma'am, Declan Brooks." The ma'am told her everything she needed to know. Military, probably army based on the bearing. "I appreciate the warning, Declan," she said, "but some things are worth the risk." She turned back to Derek. "What are the rules?" Derek smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "No rules," he said. "We go until one of us taps or can't continue. You can quit any time you want. Most people do within the first minute." "And if I win?" "You won't." "But if I do," Mackenzie pressed, "you apologize to that man, publicly, and you treat him with the respect he's earned." Derek laughed. It was a harsh sound. "Fine, and when you lose, you admit you were wrong in front of everyone." "Deal." She stepped onto the mat. The surface was familiar under her feet even through her boots. She'd spent thousands of hours on mats like this, in dojos in Virginia, training facilities in California, safe houses in countries that didn't officially exist on any mission roster. Derek began to circle her, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this dance 1,000 times. He was good. She could see it in his footwork, in the way he kept his weight balanced, ready to shoot for a takedown or counter a strike. But there was something else there too: complacency. The assumption that because she was a woman, because she wasn't wearing a gi, because she'd walked in off the street, she couldn't possibly be a threat. That assumption would cost him. He moved first, a quick jab to test her reflexes. She slipped it easily, not even bothering to counter. He threw a low kick. She checked it with her shin, absorbing the impact without flinching. His eyes narrowed slightly, not what he'd expected. He pressed forward with a combination: jab, cross, low kick, high kick, fast, technical, the kind of attack that would overwhelm most people. Mackenzie moved like water. Each strike found empty air where she'd been a fraction of a second before. She wasn't showing off, wasn't trying to humiliate him. Not yet. She was reading him, learning his rhythm, his patterns, his tells. Derek shot for a takedown. Fast, explosive. His arms reached for her legs, but she wasn't there. She'd pivoted, using his momentum against him, and suddenly he was face down on the mat with her knee pressed against his spine and her hands controlling his right arm in a position that was one slight adjustment away from breaking his shoulder. He tried to roll. She adjusted, tried to push up. She pressed down. Every attempt he made to escape only tightened the trap he was in. "Tap," she said quietly, just that one word. "No." She applied more pressure, not enough to injure, just enough to make the point crystal clear. His shoulder joint began to protest. The pain would be building now, sharp, insistent, the kind that told you injury was seconds away. "Tap," she repeated. Pride is a funny thing. It makes men do stupid things, makes them hold on when they should let go, makes them believe that admitting defeat is worse than suffering permanent damage. Derek held on for another 3 seconds. Then his free hand slapped the mat. Once, twice, 3 times. Mackenzie released him immediately and stood. Derek rolled onto his back, breathing hard, his face a mixture of pain, shock, and something else. Something that looked almost like respect. She extended her hand. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he took it, let her help him to his feet. "You're military," he said. It wasn't a question. "Navy." "SEAL." She didn't answer, didn't need to. The silence said everything. Derek looked at the old man, who was still kneeling by the spilled water, watching this exchange with an expression Mackenzie couldn't quite read. Then Derek did something that surprised everyone in the room. He walked over to the old man and extended his hand. "I'm sorry, Frank," he said. I was out of line. You didn't deserve that." Frank Caldwell looked at Derek's hand for a long moment. Then he took it, let Derek help him to his feet. "Apology accepted," Frank said quietly. But what happened next no one expected. Mackenzie walked over to Frank, and up close she could see it more clearly now. The resemblance, the shape of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders even when he was trying to make himself small. And suddenly she knew. She knew why she'd been sent to check on him, why Ryan had made her promise. "Frank Caldwell?" she asked. He looked at her with surprise. "Yes." "Ryan was your son." The words hung in the air like smoke. Frank's expression crumbled. All the careful composure he'd been maintaining shattered in an instant. His eyes filled with tears he'd probably been holding back for months, maybe years. "You knew my boy." His voice broke on the last word. "I served with him, SEAL Team 3. He was my swim buddy." She paused, let that sink in. "He asked me to check on you, to make sure you were okay." Frank's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on a bench against the wall. Derek stepped back, suddenly understanding that this was bigger than a gym dispute, bigger than pride or embarrassment. This was about loss, about grief, about the weight that veterans carried long after their service ended. "When?" Frank asked. "When did he?" "6 months ago, Syria. He saved 12 people that day, saved me." Mackenzie's voice remained steady, but there was something underneath it, something raw. "He was the best of us, sir, the absolute best." Frank put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Mackenzie knelt beside him, and this woman who'd just taken down a trained fighter without breaking a sweat now looked uncertain, vulnerable, like she was navigating terrain far more dangerous than any combat zone. "He talked about you," she said softly. "A lot. Said you two had a fight before his last deployment. Said he regretted not fixing things before he left." "We argued about everything," Frank said, his voice muffled by his hands. "About the military, about his choices, about me trying to control his life when he was already a grown man." He looked up at Mackenzie with red eyes. "I was so angry when he joined the Navy instead of the Marines, like it was some betrayal of family tradition. How stupid is that? How incredibly stupid." "Not stupid, human." "I never got to tell him I was proud, never got to say I was sorry." Frank's voice cracked again. "He died thinking I disapproved of him, that I was disappointed." Mackenzie shook her head. "He died knowing you loved him. He told me once that everything he did, every mission, every operation, he did it thinking about making you proud. Whether you said it or not, he knew." "I should have said it." "Yes, you should have." She didn't soften it, didn't offer false comfort. "But he understood, sir. Warriors' kids always understand. We grow up knowing that love and approval sometimes sound like criticism, that the hardest training comes from the people who care the most." Frank wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looked at this young woman who'd walked into a gym and upended everything in the space of 10 minutes. "Why did you do this?" he asked. "Why stand up for an old man you don't even know?" "Because Ryan asked me to, because you're his father, because I saw a Marine being treated like garbage and I couldn't walk away." She paused. "Because some things are worth the risk." Declan, who'd been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's your rank?" Mackenzie looked at him, at Derek, at Frank, at the small audience that had formed. "Lieutenant," she said. "Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves, though most people call me Ghost." The nickname landed like a revelation. Derek's eyes widened. Even Frank looked up with recognition. In the SEAL community, certain names carried weight. Ghost was one of them, known for missions that never made the news, operations that existed only in classified files, a reputation built on being invisible until the moment she needed to be seen. "The Ghost," Declan breathed, "the one who pulled those hostages out of Mosul. That was a team effort. The one who painted a target on herself to draw fire while her team extracted wounded. That was just doing my job. The one they say can disappear in an empty room." Mackenzie's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of discomfort with the attention, with the mythology that grew around operators who spent their careers in the shadows. "I'm just a sailor who keeps her promises," she said, "nothing more." But everyone in that gym knew it was more, much more. Derek especially seemed to understand what he'd done, what he'd almost done, challenging a Navy SEAL to a fight in his own gym, the arrogance of it, the stupidity of it. He could have been hurt, badly, and she'd shown mercy, had controlled the fight from start to finish without causing any real damage. That took more skill than winning. That took restraint most fighters never learned. "I'm sorry," Derek said again, but this time he was talking to Mackenzie. "I didn't know who you were, not that it matters. I shouldn't have." "You shouldn't have treated Frank like that regardless of who walked through your door," Mackenzie cut him off. "Respect isn't conditional. It's not something you give only when you might get caught. It's who you are when no one's watching." Derek nodded, looked at Frank. "I've been running this place like it's about dominance, about proving I'm the toughest guy in the room. That's not what martial arts is supposed to be." "No," Frank said quietly, "it's not." The gym was still silent. The students who'd remained were watching this unfold with the kind of attention that comes from witnessing something transformative, something that would change how they saw their instructor, how they saw strength, how they saw themselves. Mackenzie stood, helped Frank to his feet. "Ryan wanted me to make sure you were okay, that you had what you needed. What do you need, Frank?" He looked at her, at this warrior who'd known his son, who'd fought beside him, who'd come all this way to keep a promise to a dead man. "I need to hear about him," Frank said. "Everything. I need to know who he became after we stopped talking. I need to know if he was happy, if he was respected, if his life meant something." "It did more than you know." Mackenzie glanced at Derek, at Declan, at the others. "But that's a conversation that deserves privacy. And time. How about dinner, tomorrow night? I'll tell you everything I can." Frank nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Mackenzie pulled out her phone. They exchanged numbers, made plans. And in that simple exchange, something shifted. The tension that had filled the gym began to ease, not disappear, but transform into something else, something that felt like possibility. As she turned to leave, Derek stopped her. "Lieutenant," he said, would you be willing to come back sometime, to train with us, to show us what real discipline looks like?" Mackenzie looked at him for a long moment, measuring, calculating, seeing something in him that maybe he didn't see in himself yet. "Maybe," she said, "if you prove you're serious about changing, about making this place what it's supposed to be." "How do I do that?" "Start by treating every person who walks through that door like they matter. Student, janitor, whoever. Respect isn't a reward, it's a foundation." She walked out of Apex Combat Academy into the fading afternoon light. Behind her, she could feel the weight of eyes watching, measuring, understanding that they'd just witnessed something rare. A moment where pride got checked, where bullying got confronted, where a promise to a fallen warrior changed the trajectory of a stranger's life. Mackenzie sat in her truck for a moment before starting the engine, pulled out the photograph she kept in her wallet. Ryan Caldwell in his dress blues, grinning at the camera with that cocky confidence that had gotten him through Hell Week and a dozen impossible missions. She traced his face with her finger. "Found your old man," she whispered. "He's hurting, brother, missing you, but I'll look after him. That's the promise. That's what warriors do for each other." She put the photograph away, started the engine, and drove into traffic, carrying the weight of one promise kept and the knowledge that she'd be back tomorrow. Because Frank Caldwell deserved to know his son's story, deserved to understand that Ryan had died a hero, deserved to find peace in the middle of his grief. And Mackenzie Reeves kept her promises, always. How do you rebuild trust with someone you've wronged? Derek Vaughn stared at himself in the bathroom mirror of his apartment that night, seeing someone he didn't particularly like. The face staring back was familiar. Same strong jaw, same scar above his left eyebrow from a tournament in Thailand. Same eyes that had watched him build a successful gym and then slowly poison it with ego and cruelty. When had it happened? When had he stopped being a teacher and become a tyrant? He'd told himself it was about maintaining standards, about pushing people to be their best. But that wasn't it. Somewhere along the way, he'd confused strength with dominance, confused respect with fear. And today, a woman half his weight had shown him the difference in the most humiliating way possible. Except it wasn't humiliating. That was the thing. Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves could have destroyed him on that mat, could have broken his arm, choked him unconscious, made him look like a complete fool in front of his students. Instead, she'd controlled the fight with surgical precision, applied just enough pressure to prove her point, and then helped him to his feet. That was real power, the power to win without destroying, the power to prove a point without humiliation, the power to change someone's perspective without crushing their spirit. Derek had been teaching martial arts for 15 years. He thought he understood what strength meant. Turns out he'd been wrong. He thought about Frank Caldwell. How many times had he berated that man, made him feel small, treated a veteran with a lifetime of service like he was worthless? And Frank had taken it, day after day, week after week, not because he was weak, but because he needed the job, because at 68 years old with a military pension that barely covered rent, he didn't have the luxury of dignity. Derek felt sick. The next morning he arrived at the gym early, before the first class, before anyone else showed up. He found Frank in the storage room, organizing equipment. "Frank," he said, "can we talk?" Frank looked up. There was wariness in his eyes, the kind that came from being hurt too many times to trust easily. "Sure, Mr. Vaughn." "Derek, please, just Derek." He took a breath. "Yesterday, I apologized because I got called out, because someone forced my hand, but that's not good enough. You deserve better than a forced apology from someone who got his ego checked." Frank waited, said nothing. "I've been treating you like garbage," Derek continued. "For months, making you feel small, making you feel worthless. And you didn't deserve any of it. You're a Marine. You served your country. You've probably seen and done things I can't even imagine. And I treated you like you were beneath me." "I'm a janitor," Frank said quietly. "That's what I am now." "No, you're a Marine who happens to work as a janitor. There's a difference." Derek stepped closer. "I want to make this right. I want to change how I run this place, how I treat people, but I need help. I need someone to call me out when I start slipping back into old habits." "Why would I do that?" "Because your son was a SEAL. He spent his life serving others, protecting people, making the world safer. You raised him to be that way, which means you understand service. You understand what it means to make someone better even when it's hard, even when they don't deserve it." Frank's expression shifted slightly. Something softened around his eyes. "Ryan would have liked Lieutenant Reeves," Frank said. "She has his sense of honor, his willingness to step into situations that didn't concern her just because it was the right thing to do." "Tell me about him, please." And Frank did. Standing in that storage room surrounded by boxing gloves and training pads, he told Derek about his son, about a boy who'd grown up wanting to be like his father, who joined the Navy instead of the Marines because he wanted to prove himself on his own terms, not in his father's shadow, who'd earned his trident and become one of the most respected operators in his unit, who'd called home every chance he got even when their conversations were stilted and uncomfortable, who died saving his team from an ambush that should have killed them all. Derek listened, and he understood something he'd been missing. Strength wasn't about domination. It was about sacrifice, about making yourself less so others could be more, about using your power to protect, not to intimidate. That's what Ryan Caldwell had done. That's what Mackenzie Reeves had shown him. That's what Frank Caldwell embodied even while mopping floors and taking verbal abuse from someone who should have known better. "I'm going to change how this gym operates," Derek said when Frank finished. "Starting today, new rules, new culture, respect first, always. Will you help me?" "Why?" "Because you've earned the right to be respected, and because I need someone to hold me accountable, someone who won't let me slide back into being the person I was yesterday." Frank studied him for a long moment, looking for sincerity, looking for signs that this was just another manipulation, but Derek met his gaze steadily. No tricks, no games, just one man asking another for help becoming better. "Okay," Frank said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, you treat every student like they matter. Young, old, skilled, clumsy, doesn't matter. They walk through your door trusting you to teach them. You honor that trust." "Agreed." "Second, you stop hospitalizing people for fun. That kid Declan was right. You've hurt people because you could, because it made you feel powerful. That stops." Derek felt shame burn in his chest. "Agreed." "Third, you actually try to become a teacher again. Not just an instructor, a teacher. Someone who cares if their students grow. Someone who celebrates their victories and helps them through their failures." "I can do that." "Fourth," Frank's voice got quieter, "you let me bring Ryan's picture, put it up somewhere in this gym. Not hidden, somewhere visible, so people remember that real warriors don't need to prove themselves by tearing others down." Derek's throat tightened. "I'd be honored." They shook hands, not as employer and employee, but as two men who'd both lost their way and were trying to find it again. Over the next several weeks, things began to change at Apex Combat Academy. Derek stopped screaming at students who made mistakes, started coaching instead of criticizing. The atmosphere shifted. Students who'd been tense and fearful began to relax. They trained harder because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of punishment. New students joined. Word spread that the gym had changed, that it was welcoming again. That respect had replaced intimidation. Frank moved from janitor to assistant instructor. Not officially at first, but Derek started asking his opinion. Started learning that Frank had 40 years of martial arts experience, had trained in multiple disciplines, had things to teach that Derek had never learned because he'd been too arrogant to recognize wisdom when it was mopping his floors. Declan became a regular. He'd been considering quitting martial arts entirely after watching Derek's cruelty, but Mackenzie's intervention had shown him something. That standing up mattered. That real strength looked different than what he'd thought. He trained harder, became more confident, started helping newer students the way Frank helped him. And Mackenzie kept her promise. She met Frank for dinner that first night and told him everything she could about Ryan, the good days and the hard days, the missions that went perfectly and the ones that went sideways, the jokes he told, the way he always volunteered for the most dangerous positions, the fact that every single person on his team would have died for him because they knew he'd do the same for them. Frank cried, laughed, asked 1,000 questions. And slowly the grief that had been crushing him began to transform into something else. Not acceptance, not yet, but understanding. His son had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life that mattered, and knowing that made the loss bearable, almost. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Mackenzie walked into Apex Combat Academy again. This time she was expected. Derek greeted her at the door with genuine warmth. "Lieutenant, thank you for coming. I told you I'd come back if things changed. Wanted to see if you kept your word. Come look." He led her into the gym. The walls were different. Ryan Caldwell's photograph now hung prominently near the entrance. Not a formal military portrait, but a candid shot. Ryan grinning at the camera, surrounded by his team, muddy and exhausted and absolutely alive. Beneath it, a plaque. "Real strength protects, it never destroys." In memory of Corporal Ryan Caldwell, USMC, who lived these words. Mackenzie stared at the photograph for a long moment, touched the frame gently. "He'd hate being on display," she said softly. "I know," Derek replied, "but he'd love what it stands for. Every student who walks in here sees that, sees him, understands that we're training warriors, not bullies." She turned to look at the gym. Students were training, but the atmosphere was completely different from 3 weeks ago. There was focus, discipline, but also laughter, encouragement, people helping each other improve instead of competing to tear each other down. Frank appeared from the back office. When he saw Mackenzie, his face lit up. "Lieutenant Ghost," he said with a smile, "heard you were coming." They embraced, not awkwardly, but like family, like people who'd been connected by loss and had chosen to transform that connection into something stronger. "The place looks good," Mackenzie said. "Feels different." "It is different," Frank confirmed. "Derek's become the teacher he was always supposed to be, and these kids," he gestured to the students, "they're learning what real martial arts is about." "Want to join us for a session?" Derek asked. "Show everyone what actual technique looks like." Mackenzie considered. She kept her distance from martial arts since leaving active duty. It reminded her too much of training sessions with Ryan, of grappling on deployment when they had downtime, of the last time they'd sparred, 3 days before the mission that killed him. But maybe that was the problem. She'd been treating martial arts like a memorial to the dead instead of a celebration of being alive. "Yeah," she said, "let's train." What followed was 2 hours of the best training Derek had experienced in years. Mackenzie moved through techniques with a fluidity that came from 10,000 repetitions. She corrected students with patience, demonstrated complex movements with simplicity, and most importantly, she showed them that being skilled didn't mean being cruel, that you could be dangerous without being mean, that real power whispered instead of shouting. Declan worked with her directly and she pushed him hard, not cruelly, but with the kind of intensity that communicated belief. She saw potential in him, wanted to help him reach it. By the end of the session, he was exhausted and grinning. "You're good," she told him. "Really good. Ever thought about military service?" "I'm already in," he replied. "Army Reserve, Fort Sam Houston, medic training." "Combat medic. Hopefully." She nodded with approval. "We need good medics. People willing to run toward the danger instead of away from it. Keep training, keep that mindset. You'll save lives." As the class wound down, Derek gathered everyone together. "I want to say something," he announced. 3 weeks ago, I was running this gym like a dictator, treating people like they were disposable. Lieutenant Reeves walked in and showed me what real strength looks like. She didn't humiliate me, didn't break me. She corrected me, gave me a chance to be better. I'm grateful for that." The students applauded. Mackenzie looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Frank," Derek continued, "thank you for not giving up on this place, for staying even when I gave you every reason to leave, for teaching me that respect has to be earned and once you have it, you have to honor it." More applause. Frank nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "And to all of you," Derek finished, "thank you for sticking with me through the change, for trusting that this gym could become what it's supposed to be, a place where we make each other better, where we protect each other, where strength serves instead of dominates." After class, Mackenzie sat with Frank in his small office, just the two of them, away from the noise and activity. "How are you really doing?" she asked. He sighed. "Better, worse, different." He looked at Ryan's photograph on his desk. "I miss him every day, but it helps knowing you're around. That someone who knew him, who understood him, is still here." "He saved my life," Mackenzie said quietly. "In Syria, we were pinned down, bad situation. He drew their fire, gave us time to reposition, took 3 rounds doing it." "You've told me this. I know, but I need you to understand. I'm alive because of your son. Every mission I complete, every person I help, every promise I keep. That's Ryan's legacy. That's him still protecting people through me." Frank reached across the desk and took her hand. His grip was strong despite his age. "You're not just keeping a promise to Ryan," he said. "You're keeping me alive too, giving me a reason to wake up, to keep going. I was drowning before you walked into that gym. Now I'm swimming." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two warriors from different generations, connected by loss and purpose, and the understanding that service didn't end when you took off the uniform. "I'll keep coming back," Mackenzie said eventually. "As often as I can, help with training, check on Derek, make sure he stays on track. And check on me." "That too." "Good," Frank said, "because you're family now, whether you like it or not." Mackenzie smiled. It was the first real smile Frank had seen from her, unguarded, genuine, beautiful in its rarity. "I can live with that," she said. What does redemption look like when it's built on grief? 4 months after Mackenzie Reeves walked into Apex Combat Academy, the gym had become something extraordinary. Not because of fancy equipment or celebrity instructors, but because of culture. Because of the understanding that every person who stepped through those doors mattered. That strength meant lifting others up, not pushing them down. That warriors were made in moments of compassion, not just combat. Derek had become the teacher he'd always had the potential to be. Patient, thoughtful, demanding but fair. He still pushed his students hard, still expected excellence. But now it came from a place of wanting them to succeed, not wanting to prove his own superiority. The change was visible in every class. Frank had fully transitioned from janitor to senior instructor. Derek had made it official 3 months in, complete with title and salary that reflected his true value. At 68 years old, Frank had found purpose again. Every student he taught, every technique he refined, every life he touched, that was Ryan's legacy continuing. That was service extending beyond his son's death. He wore Ryan's dog tags under his gi now, not as mourning, but as remembrance. as a promise that his son's sacrifice would mean something. Declan had become a fixture at the gym. When he wasn't at Fort Sam Houston completing his combat medic training, he was at Apex, training, learning, growing into the kind of warrior who understood that healing was as important as fighting, that protecting life mattered more than taking it. Mackenzie had become his mentor. She showed up twice a month when her deployment schedule allowed, worked with him, pushed him, saw in him echoes of Ryan, that same determination, that same willingness to sacrifice for others, that same quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. "You're going to be a great medic," she told him after one particularly brutal training session. "But remember, the job isn't just keeping people alive physically. It's giving them a reason to want to stay alive. Hope matters as much as hemostatic gauze." "How do you give hope when everything's falling apart?" Declan asked. "You show them someone who cares, someone who will run into fire to pull them out, someone who sees them as human, not just another casualty. That's what Ryan did. That's what made him different." Mackenzie had grown close to Frank in ways that surprised her. She wasn't looking for a father figure, didn't need one, but Frank had become something else. A connection to Ryan, a keeper of stories, someone who understood loss in the same language she spoke. They had dinner once a week, talked about everything and nothing, sometimes about Ryan, sometimes about her missions, sometimes just about life and how to keep living when the people you love were gone. "You ever think about what happens next?" Frank asked her one evening over coffee. "Next? After the military, after active duty, what then?" Mackenzie shrugged. "I don't think about it, I'm operational, that's who I am." Ryan said the same thing, but he was thinking about it, toward the end, talked about maybe teaching, maybe doing private security work, something that let him use his skills without the constant deployments. "I can't imagine not deploying." "You will eventually. Your body will make that decision for you. Then what?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Teaching, maybe. Somewhere I can pass on what I've learned. Make sure the next generation understands that being a warrior is about service, not violence." Frank smiled. "You could do worse. You're a natural teacher. The students at Apex worship you. They worship a myth, the ghost, the operator who completed impossible missions. They don't know me. They know the parts that matter. They know you show up. You care. You push them to be better. That's teaching. That's what Ryan would have done." Mackenzie thought about that, about a future beyond active duty, beyond missions and classified operations. It felt distant, impossible, but also maybe eventually necessary. The gym's transformation had attracted attention beyond San Diego. Articles in martial arts magazines, features on podcasts about military-influence training. People wanted to understand how Derek Vaughn had gone from being known as a brutal instructor to running one of the most respected dojos on the West Coast. Derek always gave the same answer. He'd been shown what real strength looked like. Had his perspective changed by a Navy SEAL who'd chosen mercy over destruction, who'd corrected instead of crushed, who'd given him a chance to become better. But there was something Mackenzie hadn't told anyone, not Frank, not Derek, not even her commanding officer. The nightmares had gotten worse. Syria played in her head every night. The ambush, the explosions, Ryan drawing fire. The moment when she'd realized he wasn't going to make it. The way his blood had looked on the sand, dark, almost black. The way he'd looked at her in those final seconds, not afraid. Just sad, sad that he wouldn't make it home. Sad that he'd be leaving people behind. Sad that his father would never know how sorry he was for their fight. She woke up every night at 3:17, the exact time Ryan had stopped breathing. Some wounds don't show. Some battles continue long after the shooting stops. Mackenzie had saved 12 people that day in Syria, but she couldn't save the one who'd saved her. That was the weight she carried, the debt she could never repay. That's why she kept Frank's promise, why she showed up at Apex, why she mentored Declan, why she helped Derek become better. Because if she could save people here in this life, maybe that balanced the scales somehow. Maybe that made Ryan's sacrifice mean something. One evening after training, she found Frank staring at Ryan's photograph on the wall. He did that sometimes, lost in memory, lost in grief, lost in the what-ifs that plague every parent who's buried a child. "You okay?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was rough. "I keep thinking about the last conversation we had. He called me from deployment 3 days before he died. We argued about something stupid. I don't even remember what. I told him we'd talk when he got home. We never did." "He knew you loved him." "Did he? I never said it. Not enough. I was raised by men who believed showing emotion was weakness, so I was hard on him, critical, always pointing out what he could do better instead of celebrating what he'd achieved. What kind of father does that? The kind who cares too much, who wants their kid to be prepared for a hard world, who sometimes forgets that preparing them doesn't mean crushing them." Frank wiped his eyes. "You're being generous." "I'm being honest. Ryan talked about you constantly, told stories about growing up, about the lessons you taught him, not the criticism, the lessons, about honor, about service, about never giving up, about protecting people who can't protect themselves. You know who taught him all that? You did." "I wish I'd been better." "We all do, that's the curse of hindsight. But Frank, Ryan became an incredible warrior because of you. The good and the bad, the encouragement and the criticism, all of it made him who he was, and who he was saved lives. Saved mine, that's your legacy too." Frank pulled Ryan's dog tags from under his shirt, held them in his palm, worn metal that had seen combat, that had been against Ryan's chest when he died. Mackenzie had given them to him after that first dinner, told him Ryan would want his father to have them. "I'm proud of him," Frank said. "I never said it enough when he was alive, but I'm saying it now. I'm so damn proud of the man he became, the warrior he was, the hero who gave everything for his team." "He knows," Mackenzie said. "Wherever warriors go when they fall, he knows." They stood in silence, two people connected by loss, by service, by the understanding that grief was the price of love, and love was worth any price. "You've been good for this place," Frank said eventually. "Good for Derek, good for the students, good for me. I don't think you understand how much." "I'm just keeping a promise." "No, you're doing more than that. You're giving us all a reason to be better, to honor Ryan by becoming the kind of people he believed we could be. That's more than a promise. That's transformation." Mackenzie felt uncomfortable with the praise. She didn't feel transformative. She felt like someone stumbling through darkness, trying to find meaning in loss. But if Frank found comfort in believing she was helping, she could live with that. The following week, Mackenzie received orders, extended deployment, 6 months, Middle East, details classified. She told Frank during their regular dinner. He took it hard, not because she was deploying, he understood that, expected it, but because he'd come to rely on her presence, on their weekly conversations, on the connection they'd built. 6 months felt like forever. "I'll write," she promised. "Email when I can, you won't be alone." "I know, it's just, you've become family, and I've lost enough family. I'm not Ryan. I'm trained to come back, that's what I do. I complete the mission and I come back." He was trained too. "I know." She reached across the table and took his hand. "But I promise you, Frank, I will come back, I will check in. And when I'm stateside again, we'll pick up exactly where we left off. That's a promise." Promises are easy to make. And I've never broken one yet. She deployed 3 days later. 6 months in a desert that looked too much like Syria. 6 months of missions that never made the news. Of targets that existed only in classified databases. Of operations where the difference between success and failure was measured in seconds and silence. She thought about Frank constantly, about Ryan, about the Jim and Derek and Declan and everyone she'd left behind, about the promise she'd made, about whether she'd be able to keep it. Because despite her confidence, despite her training, despite everything she knew about survival, there was always risk. always chance, always the possibility that she'd become another name carved on a memorial wall. But Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves didn't die in that desert. She completed mission after mission, saved lives, eliminated threats, did the work that kept Americans safe and let them sleep soundly in their beds, ignorant of the dangers she faced on their behalf. And when her 6 months ended, she came home, kept her promise, called Frank from the airport before she even cleared security. "I'm back," she said when he answered. "Thank God," Frank breathed. "Thank God. Told you I would be. Warriors keep their promises. When can I see you?" "Give me 2 days to debrief and decompress. Then I'm all yours. Dinner, training, whatever you need." "I need my family back." "Then that's what you'll get." When Mackenzie walked into Apex Combat Academy 3 days later, the entire gym erupted. Students surrounded her, shook her hand, hugged her, told her how much they'd missed her, how the training had continued, how Derek had stayed on track, how Frank had told stories about her while she was gone, how everyone had been counting the days until she returned. Frank didn't say anything. He just walked up and wrapped her in a hug that lasted a long time. When he finally pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "Welcome home, Ghost." "Good to be home, sir." And it was. For the first time since Syria, Mackenzie felt like she had a home beyond her team, a place where people knew her, cared about her, waited for her to return. That was Ryan's final gift, not just checking on his father, but giving her a family, a purpose beyond operations, a reason to come back. She trained that day with the joy she'd been missing, laughed with students, worked technique with Declan, who completed his combat medic training and was preparing for deployment himself, watched Derek teach with the patience and skill he developed over the past months, sat with Frank afterward and told him everything she could about her deployment, the parts that weren't classified, the moments that mattered, the times she'd thought of him and Ryan and this gym and this life she was building beyond the battlefield. "I'm proud of you," Frank said. "Ryan would be too." "I'm just doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that. You're living a life worth living. You're making a difference. You're showing people what a warrior really is. That's everything." That night as Mackenzie drove home, she felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. The nightmares would still come. The weight would still press down. But now there was something else too. Hope, purpose, connection, family. She pulled out Ryan's photograph from her wallet, looked at his face in the dim light of street lamps passing by. "Kept my promise, brother. Your old man's doing good, really good, and he's not alone anymore. None of us are. Thank you for giving me that. Thank you for giving us all that." She put the photograph away, drove into the night, and knew that tomorrow she'd wake up at 3:17 with Syria playing in her head. But she also knew that after the nightmares faded, after the terror subsided, she'd have somewhere to go, someone to call, a family that didn't just exist in memory but in life. And that was worth everything. Sometimes promises cost more than we expect. Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves stood in her commanding officer's office 6 weeks after returning from deployment, staring at paperwork that would change everything. Retirement papers, not voluntary, medical. The desert had taken its toll, years of combat operations, injuries she'd pushed through, damage that had accumulated until her body simply said enough. Her back, her knee, her shoulder, all of them telling the same story. She could still operate, but not at the level required for SEAL teams. Not safely. Not without becoming a liability to her unit. Colonel Marcus Whitmore sat across from her, his face showing the kind of concern reserved for operators he'd personally commanded, officers he'd watched grow from students to warriors. "It's not up for debate, Ghost," he said quietly. "Medical board's decision is final. You've given everything. Time to let the young ones carry the weight." "I'm 32. With the body of someone 20 years older. That's what service does. You know this." Mackenzie stared at the papers. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being operational, in missions, in the teams. Without that, who was she? What was she? What am I supposed to do? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Live, Whitmore replied. Actually live, not just survive between deployments. Build something, teach, pass on what you know. There are 1,000 ways to serve that don't involve getting shot at. Teaching feels like giving up. Teaching is the hardest mission there is. You're not just responsible for yourself anymore. You're responsible for shaping the next generation, for making sure they're ready, that they understand what it really means to be a warrior. That's not giving up. That's stepping up. She signed the papers. It felt like signing away her soul. 3 weeks later, she officially retired from active duty. There was a ceremony, awards she barely remembered receiving, speeches that blended together, fellow SEALs embracing her, telling her she'd been one of the best, that her service mattered, that her legend would live on in the operations she'd completed and the lives she'd saved. It felt hollow. She called Frank from the parking lot afterward. "I'm out," she said when he answered. "Out. Medically retired, effective immediately. Are you okay?" "No," she closed her eyes, felt tears threatening. "I don't know how to not be operational." "Come to the gym. Now don't go home. Don't sit with this alone. Come here." She drove to Apex Combat Academy in a daze, walked through doors she'd walked through dozens of times, but this time felt different. She wasn't Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves, Navy SEAL. She was just Mackenzie, just a woman who'd given her body to service and now had to figure out what came next. Frank met her at the entrance, took one look at her face and wrapped her in a hug, not the quick, respectful embrace of before, but the kind of hug that said, "I'm here and you're not alone, and we'll figure this out together." "I don't know what to do," she whispered into his shoulder. "First you breathe, then we sit, then we talk, then we figure out tomorrow. One step at a time, that's all we can do." They sat in his office for hours. She told him everything, about the medical board, about the injuries she'd been hiding, about the fear that without missions she'd lose herself, about feeling like she'd failed somehow, about not knowing who she was if she wasn't Ghost. Frank listened, didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes, just listened with the patience of someone who'd navigated his own transition from active duty to civilian life decades ago. "You know what I learned," he said finally. "Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It just changes form. I spent 20 years in the Marines, combat in 3 different wars, thought I'd die in uniform. Then I retired and felt lost, purposeless. Took me years to understand that I was still serving, just differently, raising Ryan, teaching at the community center, helping veterans navigate the VA system. That was all service. It just didn't come with a rank or a deployment schedule. But you had your son, you had purpose waiting. And you have this." Frank gestured to the gym beyond his office. "Students who look up to you. Derek, who learned everything about real leadership from watching you. Declan, who models himself after you. Me, who'd be lost without you. That's not nothing, Ghost. That's everything." Mackenzie wiped her eyes. "I'm scared." "Good. Fear means you care. Means you understand the weight of what you're walking into. Teaching isn't easy, but you're not doing it alone. I'll help. Derek will help. We'll figure it out together." Over the next 3 months, Mackenzie built a new life. It wasn't easy. She woke up every morning with muscle memory screaming for her to gear up, to prep for operations, to be ready for mission briefings that would never come. But slowly, painfully, she found new rhythms, new purpose. She began teaching at Apex full-time, not just showing up twice a month, but actually building curriculum, developing programs, working with students individually, discovering that she loved it. Loved seeing people grow. Loved the moment when something clicked and a student understood not just the technique but the philosophy behind it. The understanding that martial arts was about self-improvement, not violence, about discipline, not destruction. Derek made her a partner in the gym, equal ownership, equal say. It wasn't about money, it was about recognition, about acknowledging that she'd transformed this place as much as he had, that they were building something together, something that mattered. Frank became her co-teacher. They worked in perfect synchronization. She provided tactical expertise, he provided wisdom. Together, they created a training environment that attracted students from across California, not because of fancy facilities, but because of culture, because every person who walked through those doors was treated with respect, was pushed to grow, was taught that strength meant lifting others up. Declan returned from his first deployment with stories that reminded Mackenzie too much of her own. The chaos, the fear, the weight of keeping people alive while everything around you tried to kill them. She worked with him, helped him process, taught him that it was okay to not be okay. That asking for help wasn't weakness. That warriors took care of each other, especially in the aftermath. You saved people, she told him. That's what matters, not how many, not under what circumstances. You ran toward danger and you saved people. That's everything. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. That's the curse of being good at this. You always remember the ones you couldn't save more than the ones you did. How do you deal with it? Honestly, I'm still figuring that out, but I've learned that you can't do it alone. You need people, family, a purpose beyond the missions. That's what this place is for me now. What Frank and Derek and all these students are for me. They keep me anchored when the grief tries to pull me under. 6 months after her retirement, Mackenzie received a call from Colonel Whitmore. He had a proposition. The Navy wanted to develop a program to help transitioning SEALs, warriors who were struggling with the shift from operational to civilian life, who needed guidance, support, understanding from someone who'd walked the path. They wanted Mackenzie to lead it. It's not active duty, Whitmore explained. It's contractor work. You'd run a 6-week program, help operators transition, teach them that life continues after the teams, that service continues in different forms. Why me? Because you've done it successfully. You've built something meaningful, and because they'll listen to you, your ghost. You've earned that credibility. Mackenzie thought about it for 2 days, talked to Frank, to Derek, to the students who'd become family. Everyone told her the same thing: do it. Help people the way you've helped us. Pay forward what Frank and Ryan gave you. She accepted. The program launched 3 months later, called Warriors Forward. 20 transitioning SEALs in the first cohort. Men and women dealing with injuries, trauma, identity crisis, the overwhelming loss of purpose that came with leaving active service. Mackenzie stood in front of them on day 1, understanding their pain because she'd lived it, still was living it. I'm not going to lie to you, she said. This is hard, harder than Bud S in some ways, because you're not just building physical strength, you're rebuilding identity. You're learning to be warriors without uniforms, heroes without missions, and that's terrifying, but it's also possible. I'm proof of that. You are not your rank, you are not your operations. You are the values those things taught you, the commitment to service, the willingness to sacrifice, the understanding that strength means protecting others. Those don't disappear when you retire, they just find new forms. She told them about Ryan, about Frank, about a promise that had transformed her life, about a gym that had become family, about students who'd given her purpose, about teaching that had become her new mission, not because she'd given up on being a warrior, but because she discovered that warriors served in countless ways, that protecting people didn't always require a weapon, that saving lives sometimes meant teaching someone to believe in themselves. The 6-week program was brutal, not physically. These were still elite operators. The physical part was easy, but emotionally, psychologically, forcing them to confront their fears, their losses, their uncertainty about the future. Mackenzie worked with each person individually, learned their stories, understood their struggles, connected them with resources, with people who could help, with opportunities for continued service in forms they'd never considered. By the end of 6 weeks, all 20 participants had plans. Some were going into teaching, some into private security, some into advocacy work for veterans, some into completely different fields, but they all had direction, purpose, hope. The program's success led to more cohorts, more transitioning warriors, more lives rebuilt. Mackenzie found herself traveling, teaching, speaking at military installations, helping warriors understand that their service didn't end with retirement, that they had skills, experiences, perspectives that the civilian world desperately needed, that they could continue protecting people, just differently. And through it all, she kept her promise to Ryan, checked on Frank regularly, made sure Derek stayed on track, trained with students at Apex, mentored Declan as he navigated his own military career, built a family from the pieces of loss and commitment and shared understanding. 1 year after her retirement, Mackenzie stood at Ryan Caldwell's grave, Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery, his headstone stark white against green grass. She came here sometimes, to talk, to remember, to tell him about his father, about the life she'd built from the promise she'd kept. "Your old man's doing great," she said quietly. "Better than great. He's teaching again, helping people, living with purpose. All because you asked me to check on him. All because you knew what he needed even when you were dying." The wind carried her words away toward the ocean. She placed her hand on the cold stone. "I miss you every day, but I understand now what you were doing, giving me a mission beyond missions, a purpose that would outlast deployment cycles and operations. You were giving me a life. Thank you for that. Thank you for trusting me with your father, with your legacy. I hope I'm doing you proud." She stood there for a long time, remembering, grieving, grateful. Then she walked back to her truck where Frank was waiting. They'd come together, father and surrogate sister united in memory, in loss, in the understanding that love didn't end with death. It transformed. "Ready?" Frank asked. "Ready." They drove back to Apex Combat Academy, to students who were waiting, to Derek who'd become a brother, to Declan who was preparing for another deployment, to a life that Mackenzie had built from the wreckage of loss, to purpose that extended beyond herself, to family that chose each other instead of being born into, to the understanding that sometimes the hardest missions were the ones that never made headlines, the quiet work of helping people heal, of teaching them strength, of showing them that warriors came in many forms, and that service, real service, never ended. It just evolved. And in that evolution, in that transformation, there was something beautiful, something worth fighting for, something worth living for. The drive back from Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery was quiet. Frank sat in the passenger seat, watching the Pacific Ocean pass by through the window. Mackenzie navigated traffic with the same precision she'd once applied to tactical operations. Different context, same discipline. They developed a comfortable silence over the past year, the kind that didn't need filling with words. But today, Frank had something on his mind. She could see it in the way his jaw worked, the way his fingers drummed against his knee. "What is it?" she asked. "I've been thinking about a memorial service," he said. "A proper one, at the cemetery, for Ryan. It's been almost 2 years. I need closure, need to say goodbye properly, but I don't know how, don't know what that looks like. We'll do it together. He was yours by blood, but he was mine by battle. We'll honor him properly. I want Derek there, and Declan, and the students from Apex, everyone who's been touched by what Ryan started when he asked you to look after me. Is that strange?" "No, it's perfect. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up, who care, who carry the memory forward." They planned the memorial for a Saturday morning 6 weeks later. Mackenzie coordinated with Ryan's former unit. SEAL Team 3 sent representatives, 24 operators who deployed with Ryan, who'd known him, respected him, mourned him. Derek closed the gym for the day, brought 15 students who'd learned about Ryan's story, who understood that the photograph on their wall represented more than one man's service. It represented the values they were learning, the philosophy they were embracing. Declan came home from Fort Sam Houston on leave specifically for this, wore his dress uniform, stood with the kind of bearing that would have made Ryan proud. Other veterans from San Diego showed up. Word had spread through the military community about Frank Caldwell, about his son, about the gym that had become a place of healing and honor. They came to pay respects, to support a fellow veteran, to remember a fallen warrior. The morning was perfect. Clear California sky, ocean breeze carrying salt and the scent of eucalyptus. sunlight making Ryan's headstone gleam white. Mackenzie stood beside Frank in her dress whites, every ribbon earned through sacrifice, every medal a story she'd never fully tell. She debated wearing civilian clothes, not wanting to make this about her, but Frank had asked her to wear the uniform. Said Ryan would want it that way, would want the world to see who'd kept the promise. Colonel Whitmore attended. He'd known Ryan, had approved the mission that killed him, carried his own grief about that day, about the intelligence that had been wrong, about the ambush that shouldn't have happened. He approached Mackenzie before the ceremony. "You did good, Ghost," he said quietly. "Ryan would be grateful, not just for looking after Frank, but for everything you've built, the program, the gym, the lives you've changed." "Just keeping a promise, sir." "It's never just that, you know better." The ceremony began at 1000 hours. Military precision. Frank stood at the podium first, struggled through words he'd written and rewritten a dozen times, talked about raising a son who'd been too much like him, stubborn, determined, allergic to admitting weakness, about arguments that seemed important at the time but meant nothing now, about pride and regret and love that was always there but sometimes hidden behind expectations and disappointment, about wishing he could go back. Say the things that mattered, listen instead of lecture, accept instead of criticize. His voice broke multiple times. Mackenzie stood beside him, ready to step in if needed, but Frank pushed through, said what needed saying, what Ryan deserved to hear even if he couldn't hear it anymore. "My son died a hero," Frank finished. "But he lived as something more important. He lived as a good man, someone who cared about his teammates, who sacrificed for others, who understood that strength meant service, not dominance. I'm proud of him, more than I ever told him, and I'm grateful to Lieutenant Reeves for giving me the chance to honor his memory properly, for keeping the promise he made her make, for showing me that Ryan's legacy continues through the lives he touched and the values he embodied." He stepped back. Mackenzie moved to the podium, looked at the faces gathered, warriors and students, veterans and civilians, all connected by Ryan Caldwell's story. "I didn't prepare remarks," she said, "because anything formal feels wrong. Ryan wasn't formal, he was real, honest, blunt when he needed to be, gentle when someone was hurting. He was my swim buddy through Hell Week, my teammate on a dozen deployments, the operator who saved my life in Syria by giving his own." She pulled Ryan's dog tags from her pocket, the ones she'd given to Frank. He'd returned them to her that morning, asked her to add them to the memorial. "These were against his chest when he died," she continued. "They represent everything he was, every mission, every sacrifice, every choice to put others before himself. Frank asked me to place them here, to leave them as a permanent reminder of what Ryan gave. But I think Ryan would want something else, would want these to continue serving, to inspire, to remind people what warriors really are." She walked to where Derek stood and placed the tags in his hands. Ryan never met Derek Vaughn, but his story changed Derek's life, changed how he teaches, how he leads, how he understands strength. These tags should stay at Apex Combat Academy, should hang beside Ryan's photograph, should remind every student who walks through those doors that real warriors protect, that service continues beyond combat, that sacrifice means something when it inspires others to be better. Derek's eyes filled with tears. He clutched the tags like they were sacred, which they were. The ceremony continued. SEAL Team 3 members spoke, shared stories, some funny, some heartbreaking, all revealing a picture of a man who'd been deeply loved by people who didn't love easily, who'd earned respect in a community that demanded excellence, who'd died the way he'd lived, protecting others. Declan read a letter he'd written about how Ryan's story had inspired him to become a combat medic, about understanding that saving lives mattered more than taking them, about carrying forward values he'd learned from someone he'd never met but knew through the people who'd known him. The sun climbed higher as the ceremony concluded. People began to disperse, but a woman approached Frank hesitantly, maybe 25, dark hair, Ryan's eyes. She carried a toddler on her hip, a little boy with Frank's stubborn chin and Ryan's serious expression. "Mr. Caldwell," her voice was soft, uncertain. Frank turned, froze, stared at her like she was a ghost. "I'm Emily. This is Jackson, your grandson." The world tilted. Frank couldn't breathe, couldn't process. A grandson, Ryan's son, he hadn't known. Ryan had never said. "We got married 6 months before his last deployment," Emily continued, words tumbling out fast like she was afraid if she stopped she wouldn't be able to start again. "He wanted to tell you after he got back, after you'd both had time to cool down from your fight. He wanted to introduce you properly, wanted Jackson to know his grandfather." Tears streamed down Frank's face. He reached for the boy with shaking hands. Jackson went to him without hesitation, grabbed Frank's finger with a grip that was pure Caldwell stubbornness. "Hi, Jackson," Frank whispered. "I'm your grandpa. I wish your daddy could see this." Emily was crying too. "He talked about you constantly, about making things right, about wanting you and Jackson to have a relationship. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I'd find you. I'm sorry it took so long. I was scared. Didn't know how you'd react. Didn't know if you'd want to know us." "Want to know you?" Frank's voice broke completely. "Your family, your Ryan's family, that makes you mine." Mackenzie stepped back, gave them privacy, found Whitmore watching with understanding in his eyes. "Didn't see that coming," he murmured. Neither did Frank, but Ryan's still taking care of his old man. Even now, that's the thing about warriors. Their legacy doesn't end with their last breath. It ripples forward. She watched Frank holding his grandson, talking to his daughter-in-law, learning about the family he didn't know he had, about the life Ryan had been building, about the future that had been stolen but somehow was still unfolding. Derek approached with the dog tags. "I'll take care of these," he promised. "They'll hang in a place of honor. Every student will know Ryan's story, will understand what these represent." "Thank you." "No, thank you for everything, for showing me what leadership really is, for giving this gym a purpose beyond just teaching people to fight, for bringing Ryan's story into our lives. We're better for it, all of us." The memorial concluded, but the connections it created continued. Emily became part of Frank's life, part of their extended family. Jackson grew up visiting Apex Combat Academy, learning from his grandfather, hearing stories about his father, understanding that he came from warriors, that sacrifice and service weren't just words. They were legacy. They were identity. They were what made the Caldwell family who they were. Mackenzie continued teaching, leading warriors forward, helping transitioning operators find purpose, building a network of veterans who supported each other, who understood that service continued in countless forms, who refused to let anyone fall through the cracks. Declan deployed twice more, came home each time changed but not broken, leaned on Mackenzie, on Frank, on the family they'd built, eventually decided to transition out of active duty, became an instructor at Apex, taught combat first aid to students, passed on the skills that had saved lives, the values that made warriors more than just fighters. Derek transformed completely. The arrogant instructor who'd kicked a bucket and berated a veteran became someone unrecognizable from that person. He treated every student like family, built a gym culture that attracted people from across the country, got offers to expand, to franchise, to make Apex into a chain, turned them all down, said what they'd built couldn't be replicated. It required authentic commitment, real change, leadership that came from humility, not ego. He placed Ryan's dog tags in a shadow box beside his photograph, added a plaque that read, "In memory of Corporal Ryan Caldwell, USMC, whose sacrifice changed more than just a military outcome. He changed hearts, changed lives, changed everything." 3 years after Ryan's death, Frank stood in that gym teaching a class. Jackson sat on the sidelines watching his grandfather with the kind of attention children reserve for heroes. Emily trained with other students, learning, growing, understanding why Ryan had loved this life, why service mattered, why sacrifice meant something. Mackenzie watched from Frank's office. Her body still ached from old injuries. Her mind still replayed Syria at 3:17 every morning, but she'd found peace, not complete, not perfect, but real. The kind that came from keeping promises, from building family, from understanding that Ryan's death hadn't been meaningless, it had been transformation. "What are you thinking about?" Whitmore asked. He'd stopped by to check on the program, to see how Warriors Forward was progressing, to make sure Mackenzie was okay. "That sometimes the hardest missions are the ones we never see coming," she replied. "Ryan asked me to check on his dad, simple request, but it became everything. It gave me purpose, family, a reason to wake up every morning beyond missions. You gave them something too. Frank would be lost without you. Derek would still be the person he was 3 years ago. Declan wouldn't have the mentor he needed. Jackson wouldn't know his father's story. That's not nothing, Ghost. That's legacy." She nodded, watched Frank teaching, watched Jackson laughing, watched Emily practicing techniques with the same determination Ryan had once shown. "Ryan Caldwell's name is carved in stone at Fort Rosecrans," she said quietly. "But that's not where his legacy lives. It lives here, in this gym, in the students Derek teaches with respect instead of cruelty, in the veterans Frank mentors, in the family that refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten, in me, in everyone who knew him or learned about him or was touched by what his story inspired." "That's what warriors do," Whitmore said. "We protect, we serve, we sacrifice. And when we fall, we trust that the brothers and sisters we leave behind will carry forward, will continue the mission, will make sure our deaths meant something. You did that for Ryan, you're still doing it." Mackenzie stood, walked back into the gym, joined the class, worked alongside Frank teaching techniques that could save lives or take them depending on intent, corrected students with patience, encouraged them with genuine care, showed them what a warrior really was, not someone who dominated, but someone who lifted others up, someone who understood that real strength was measured not in violence but in service, not in destruction but in protection, not in proving superiority but in honoring equality. The class ended. Students bowed, showed respect not because they feared their instructors but because they'd earned it through consistency, integrity, wisdom. Frank approached Mackenzie as everyone filed out. "Thank you," he said, "just that, nothing more needed." "For what?" "For keeping your promise, for giving me my family back, for showing me that Ryan's death wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something else, something that continues through Jackson, through you, through everyone here. I should be thanking you. You gave me purpose when I'd lost mine. You showed me that teaching matters as much as operating, that transformation is possible, that family can be built, not just born into." They stood together watching Jackson play with training equipment under Emily's watchful eye. The next generation, Ryan's legacy made flesh, growing up in a place that honored his father, learning values his grandfather embodied, surrounded by warriors who understood that strength served, never destroyed. And in that moment, Lieutenant Mackenzie Reeves understood something fundamental. Promises weren't just obligations, they were bridges. Connections between past and future, between loss and hope, between warriors who fell and the people they left behind. Ryan had built that bridge when he asked her to check on Frank, had trusted her to carry his love forward, to make sure his father knew he mattered, that his son had died proud of where he came from, proud of who had raised him, proud to be a Caldwell. She'd kept that promise, but in keeping it she'd received something invaluable in return. She'd found her own path, her own family, her own legacy that would extend beyond missions and medals, that would live in students she taught, veterans she helped, lives she changed not through violence but through compassion, through standing up when it mattered, through refusing to let injustice go unchallenged, through understanding that sometimes the most important battles happened in gyms and offices and quiet conversations, not in deserts with hostile forces. The sun set over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside Apex Combat Academy, lights blazed warm against gathering darkness. Students continued training. Frank continued teaching. Derek continued building the culture that had transformed this place. Declan continued learning. Emily continued growing. Jackson continued discovering. And Mackenzie continued keeping her promise, not just to Ryan, but to herself. To every warrior who'd ever fallen, to the understanding that service never ended, it just evolved. And in that evolution, something beautiful emerged, something worth every sacrifice, something worth protecting, something that whispered in the quiet moments between chaos, this is why we fight, not for glory, not for recognition, but for each other, for the families we leave behind, for the promises that outlive us, for the legacy that says we were here, we mattered, we made the world better. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.